Against all odds, how a CEO fell in love with the journalist. The Tribune broadcasting conference room is tense. Around a polished mahogany table, reporters wait for the next announcement. At the far end, Destiny Johnson, dressed in a navy blazer, sits with her notebook closed, her eyes steady though her chest tightens. Leslie Montgomery, her supervisor, clears her throat and names the new senior correspondent. Another colleague with fewer years, fewer stories, and less impact than Destiny. A polite round of applause follows, but Destiny remains still. This is the third time she has been overlooked. The camera holds on her face. No outburst, no tears, only quiet control. Beneath that composure is exhaustion, frustration, and the knowledge that her dedication has been consistently dismissed. Her pitch is buried, her investigations ignored, her achievements claimed by others. As Montgomery moves on to the next agenda item, Destiny grips her pen, knowing she will go back to work anyway, because journalism is not just her job, it is her calling. Yet the question lingers, pressing into the silence. What would you do if the person meant to lift you up was the one holding you down? Stay with us, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Tomorrow's story continues this journey. Let's begin. Destiny Johnson grew up on Chicago's South Side, where life was defined by grit and sacrifice. Her grandmother worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices at night and caring for children during the day, while her mother studied at Harold Washington College, hoping education would open doors their family had never been able to step through. Destiny absorbed those lessons early. Hard work was not optional, it was survival. Yet she also carried a dream that seemed bigger than her block, her school, and the expectations others had for her. She wanted to tell stories. Not the kind that faded into the background, but stories that revealed truth, gave voice to communities, and demanded accountability. Journalism, to her, was both responsibility and liberation. Her brilliance carried her to Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, where she graduated at the top of her class. Every accolade, every long night spent editing, every internship completed with precision, all of it led to her first real job offer. When Tribune Broadcasting called, she thought she had stepped into the future she had envisioned since childhood. Walking into the sleek glass building on North Michigan Avenue, she believed she had earned her seat at the table. That belief didn't last. From her very first day, Destiny noticed the distance in Leslie Montgomery's eyes. The supervisor, respected by many in the newsroom, was sharp in tone and quick to dismiss. To others, she offered nods of approval, even light jokes. With Destiny, the tone hardened. When Destiny pitched thoughtful story ideas about housing struggles in Pilsen or cultural celebrations in Bronzeville, Montgomery would wave them away with a clipped remark. "We've done that." Days later, a white male colleague could suggest nearly the same angle and receive an assignment complete with production support. Assignments became another form of quiet punishment. While her peers were sent downtown to cover breaking political developments or citywide events, Destiny was dispatched to suburban fairs, ribbon cuttings, or small charity runs with limited relevance to the broader audience. At first, she pushed through with determination, telling herself that strong reporting, no matter how small the assignment, could still matter. She gave every segment her full effort, interviewing participants thoroughly, checking facts with precision, writing with clarity. Yet no matter how strong her work, it was sidelined while others' stories took the spotlight. The pattern was clear, and each editorial meeting deepened the frustration. One morning, as the newsroom gathered in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Grant Park, Destiny pitched a detailed investigation into the impact of budget cuts on Chicago public schools. She had spent weeks gathering preliminary sources and mapping out leads. Montgomery barely glanced at her notes. "Not a priority," she said flatly, moving to the next person. Minutes later, another colleague proposed a surface-level feature on city education trends. This time, Montgomery nodded approvingly. "Good initiative. Let's move on that." Destiny sat back in silence, her pen pressing into her notebook until the ink nearly tore the paper. Months of these dismissals built into a steady weight, but the breaking point came with the announcement of a promotion. Destiny had been at the network for 3 years. Her portfolio was filled with hard-hitting community stories, her viewership ratings were strong, and her reporting carried depth. Yet when the name was read, it wasn't hers. Jake Morrison, a recent hire with less than a year of experience at the station, walked to the front of the room, his smile wide as applause filled the space. Montgomery praised his fresh energy and leadership potential. Destiny's chest tightened, but her expression remained calm. She clapped politely, her face betraying nothing while her stomach churned. For Jake, this was opportunity. For Destiny, it was confirmation that her work, no matter how excellent, was not being seen with fairness. As the meeting ended, colleagues clustered around Jake, offering congratulations. Destiny gathered her notes quietly, her chair scraping softly against the floor. The newsroom buzzed with celebration, but in her ears there was only the heavy silence of disappointment. This was not just a single loss. It was the latest wound in a series of humiliations, each one sharper than the last. She knew she would have to carry herself with the same grace she always had, but in that moment, a thought pressed at her mind. How much longer could she keep fighting in a place that refused to see her? Destiny refused to let the disappointment of losing the promotion to Jake Morrison dictate the quality of her work. If anything, the setback hardened her resolve. She threw herself into every assignment, no matter how insignificant it seemed on paper. Covering a small food drive in Englewood, she uncovered a deeper story about how local organizers were stepping in to fill gaps left by city budget cuts. Reporting on a neighborhood art fair in Humboldt Park, she connected with community leaders who became long-term sources for broader stories about culture, identity, and resilience. Her approach was different from many of her colleagues. While some rushed to meet deadlines with surface-level coverage, Destiny took time to understand the people behind the headlines. She was in church basements, community centers, and small businesses, listening to voices that rarely made it onto primetime broadcasts. Viewers noticed. Whenever her stories aired, feedback poured in through emails, calls, and social media. Finally, someone telling our story right. One viewer wrote after her segment on Bronzeville's small business revival. The recognition from the public gave Destiny the fuel she needed to keep going. Yet in the newsroom, the applause never reached her. Montgomery continued to wield her authority in ways that diminished Destiny's progress. Investigative pieces that Destiny developed, carefully researched, supported by sources, and rich with detail, were quietly posted online without promotion, buried beneath lighter fare. Meanwhile, stories with far less depth from her colleagues were highlighted during evening broadcasts. The imbalance was undeniable. When the second senior correspondent position opened, Destiny dared to hope again. By then, she had accumulated years of fieldwork, viewer trust, and a portfolio that reflected both range and rigor. Her application highlighted her investigations into city housing contracts, her features on cultural events that brought in strong ratings, and her ability to connect with communities others overlooked. She knew she had put in the work, and despite Montgomery's hostility, she believed the results spoke for themselves. But the announcement day delivered another blow. The promotion went to Jennifer Walsh, a reporter who had been at Tribune Broadcasting for less than 2 years. Jennifer was personable and eager, but her record was dotted with mistakes Destiny had quietly helped her correct before they aired. Destiny had mentored her at times, walking her through source verification or editing scripts to ensure accuracy. Yet Montgomery praised Jennifer's strategic thinking and long-term growth potential, as if Destiny's years of proven excellence carried no weight at all. The sting was sharper this time, not just because of the lost opportunity, but because of the blatant disregard for merit. In the conference room, Destiny kept her posture straight as applause echoed once again. Her mind replayed every late night spent polishing scripts, every early morning spent chasing interviews, every effort to go above and beyond. It was as though none of it had ever happened. In the weeks that followed, Montgomery's tactics became even more pointed. During editorial meetings, she framed Destiny's closeness with sources as a flaw, suggesting that Destiny blurred lines of professionalism. When Destiny raised concerns about transparency in a city council deal, Montgomery cut her off mid-sentence, dismissing the angle as overcomplicating the story. The undermining was no longer subtle, it was public. Destiny began documenting everything. Every pitch that was dismissed only to be reassigned to another reporter days later. Every investigative piece buried with little to no visibility. Every offhand comment questioning her professionalism. She kept records of her viewer ratings, emails from grateful community members, and internal feedback that contradicted Montgomery's criticisms. It was a quiet act of self-preservation, evidence for herself that she was not imagining the injustice. Still, the toll weighed heavily. Walking into the newsroom each morning, she felt the distance between how hard she worked and how little recognition she received. Her colleagues noticed the imbalance but said little, some out of discomfort, others out of fear of drawing Montgomery's ire themselves. The silence in the room felt louder than the applause that had greeted Jake and Jennifer's promotions. At night, Destiny wrestled with her emotions. She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her resilience by example, and her mother, who had studied into the late hours believing education would change everything. Destiny had achieved the education, the training, the discipline, yet she was being held back for reasons she couldn't fix by effort alone. Her journal became both a record of injustice and a place to steady herself, filled with notes like, "You are qualified. You are worthy. Don't let them rewrite your truth." What she didn't know then was that these quiet acts of strength, her persistence, her documentation, her refusal to surrender her integrity, were preparing her for the turning point ahead. But in those moments, all she could feel was the sharp edge of isolation, the loneliness of knowing that excellence wasn't enough when the person in power refused to see it. Destiny was still reeling from the sting of Jennifer Walsh's promotion when Leslie Montgomery handed her a new assignment. Montgomery didn't even look up from her notes during the morning editorial meeting when she said, "Destiny, I need you to handle the Chambers interview. It's scheduled for next week. Just get the standard soundbites about market expansion and philanthropy, nothing complicated." Around the table, a few reporters exchanged glances. An interview with Alexander Chambers was no small task. The billionaire CEO of Chambers Industries rarely granted media access. When he did, it was usually to national outlets, not local affiliates. But Montgomery's tone reduced it to busy work, as though Destiny was being given a task simply to keep her occupied. Destiny accepted the assignment with her usual calm. Outwardly, she nodded and jotted the details into her notebook. Inside, she understood what was happening. Montgomery wasn't offering her an opportunity. She was sidelining her with a piece expected to be routine and forgettable. But Destiny had never treated any assignment as routine. If she was going to interview Alexander Chambers, she would approach it with the same rigor she brought to every story. She began preparing immediately. While others might have leaned on press releases and stock profiles, Destiny dug deeper. She read through years of business filings, noting how Chambers Industries had expanded aggressively into real estate and tech. She spoke with former employees who described Alexander as brilliant but distant, someone who valued efficiency over connection. She combed through archives of his rare interviews, highlighting not only what he said but what he avoided. Late into the night, she drafted her questions. She wasn't interested in shallow remarks about quarterly profits or charitable donations. She wanted to probe into how his company's developments affected Chicago neighborhoods, what responsibility billionaires held toward communities displaced by gentrification, and how he reconciled success with social accountability. These were not the questions Montgomery expected her to ask, but Destiny wasn't there to fulfill low expectations. Meanwhile, Alexander Chambers was preparing in his own way. At 52, he was a figure both admired and scrutinized. Chambers Industries had grown from a small family manufacturing business into a multi-billion-dollar empire under his leadership. Forbes listed him among the wealthiest men in America, yet his personal life remained guarded. Widowed in his early 40s and without children, Alexander lived in a penthouse on Michigan Avenue, but spent most of his time in boardrooms or traveling for business. His closest companions were advisors, attorneys, and a loyal but small circle of executives. The isolation showed. Colleagues described him as courteous but detached, commanding respect more than warmth. While the press painted him as a titan of industry, those who met him often walked away with the impression that his wealth created distance rather than connection. For Alexander, power and responsibility were constants. Intimacy and trust were rare. The morning of the interview, Destiny arrived at Chambers Industries headquarters on LaSalle Street. The building towered over the financial district, its glass exterior gleaming in the sunlight. Inside, the lobby was expansive, with marble floors and towering columns that seemed designed to remind visitors of the company's stature. Security was tight, yet professional. After presenting her credentials, Destiny was escorted upstairs to the executive suite. As the elevator climbed, Destiny steadied her nerves. She had interviewed politicians, community leaders, and activists before, but this was different. She was stepping into the world of immense wealth and influence, a world designed to intimidate. Still, she reminded herself of the same principle she carried into every story. No one was above accountability, and every voice deserved to be heard. The executive floor was hushed, lined with artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. When Alexander Chambers entered the conference room, he carried himself with quiet authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he extended a firm handshake and offered a polite smile. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice even, "thank you for coming." Destiny returned the handshake, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Mr. Chambers." What was scheduled as a 30-minute conversation would become much more, but in that first moment, neither of them could have predicted the significance of their meeting. For Destiny, it was an assignment meant to sideline her. For Alexander, it was just another interview in a long line of media obligations. Yet as the recorder clicked on, the foundation of something unexpected began to take shape. The recorder clicked on, and Destiny began with questions that immediately set the tone apart from what Alexander was used to. Most journalists opened with market forecasts or philanthropic press releases. Destiny didn't. "Mr. Chambers, Chambers Industries is one of the largest developers in Chicago. When new properties are built, many longtime residents are forced out. How do you reconcile growth with displacement?" Alexander raised his eyebrows slightly. This wasn't a warm-up question. He leaned back in his chair, considering her words. For the first time in months, he found himself challenged in a way that required more than polished talking points. Destiny waited calmly, her pen poised above her notebook. When he finally answered, his tone was measured. "Economic development is complicated. It creates jobs, revitalizes areas, but yes, it can also push people out. The balance isn't simple." She pressed again. "Doesn't someone in your position have a responsibility to make sure that balance doesn't come at the cost of people's lives?" The exchange surprised him. He was accustomed to deference, not insistence. Instead of irritation, however, he felt a flicker of respect. This young journalist wasn't intimidated by wealth or power. She wanted truth, not sound bites. 30 minutes passed, and neither noticed. Destiny moved from housing displacement to labor conditions, corporate accountability, and the human consequences of mergers. Alexander, who usually deflected or cut interviews short, stayed engaged. Her questions were informed, her follow-ups precise. She had done her homework, and it showed. For every answer he gave, she countered with context. Statistics on neighborhood closures, quotes from community leaders, examples of overlooked workers. This wasn't confrontation for spectacle, it was journalism at its sharpest. She asked hard questions, but she listened too, drawing out more depth than he had revealed in years. 2 hours later, his assistant knocked lightly on the door to remind him of another meeting. Alexander waved her off, still answering Destiny's question about public trust in large corporations. He realized he had shared more than he intended, even glimpses of personal reflection. "After my wife passed, I buried myself in work," he admitted at one point, almost surprising himself. Maybe too much. It was easier than dealing with the rest. Destiny didn't exploit the vulnerability. She acknowledged it with quiet respect before steering back to his vision for Chicago. That balance struck him deeply. She had the integrity to treat his admission with care, yet the discipline to keep the focus professional. When the recorder finally clicked off, there was a silence neither of them rushed to fill. Alexander studied her across the table, intrigued not only by the quality of her questions, but by the way she carried herself, composed, principled, and unafraid. "You're not like most reporters," he said. Destiny smiled faintly. "I take that as a compliment." "It's meant as one," he replied. "Most come here for headlines. You came for answers." She closed her notebook, preparing to leave, though her mind replayed every moment. What had been assigned as busy work turned into the most substantial interview of her career. She sensed she had gained more than material for a segment. She had earned the respect of one of the city's most powerful men. As she walked through the glass corridors toward the elevator, Alexander found himself lingering at the doorway, watching her leave. He felt a pull he couldn't immediately define. It wasn't just attraction, it was recognition. In her persistence, he saw authenticity. In her professionalism, he saw strength. Back at Tribune Broadcasting, Montgomery barely glanced at the notes Destiny submitted. "Keep it short. We don't need a documentary," she muttered. To her, the piece was filler. But Alexander had already called his assistant, requesting that future interviews with Chambers Industries be directed to Destiny Johnson specifically. That single decision shifted the ground beneath her career. What began as an assignment designed to sideline her had instead opened a door to something larger. An ongoing professional relationship, and the spark of a connection neither Destiny nor Alexander could ignore. The first follow-up request came just a week after their initial meeting. Chambers Industries announced a new sustainability initiative, and instead of granting access to a senior business correspondent, Alexander personally asked that Destiny conduct the interview. The assignment landed on Montgomery's desk with a note from his office, leaving her no choice but to approve it. Her clipped tone when handing it over made clear she was not pleased. Destiny accepted without visible reaction, though inside she felt both vindicated and cautious. This opportunity was more than rare. It was risky in an environment where any success seemed to deepen her supervisor's hostility. At their second meeting, Alexander greeted her with an ease that surprised them both. He remembered details from their last conversation, her perspective on community displacement, her frustration with stories that never made it past the newsroom gatekeepers. He asked thoughtful questions in return, not as part of the interview, but in the pauses before and after. When the recorder wasn't running, their exchanges revealed common ground. He spoke of his Midwestern upbringing, the lessons of discipline and resilience. She spoke of growing up on the South Side, the pride and struggle of a community often reduced to headlines instead of lived experience. What began as professional respect slowly edged toward something warmer. During one break, while his staff refilled glasses of water, Alexander leaned slightly forward and said, "You ask about responsibility like it's personal, not just professional." "For me, it is," Destiny replied. "The stories I chase aren't abstract. They're about families who remind me of mine. If journalism doesn't serve them, then what's the point?" He studied her words, realizing how rarely he heard such conviction. Most conversations in his world were transactional. With Destiny, there was no performance. She simply meant what she said. Over the next few months, their professional interactions grew frequent. Whenever a new initiative required press coverage, Alexander's office bypassed the usual process and went directly to Tribune Broadcasting, requesting Destiny. Each time, she came prepared, her questions sharp, her delivery professional. Yet beneath the formal setting, their connection deepened. Between questions on corporate strategy, they discussed favorite books, the resilience of Chicago neighborhoods, and the ways leadership could either harm or uplift. The turning point came when Alexander suggested stepping out of the boardroom. "You've asked me how development affects the city," he said during one interview. "Let me see it through your perspective. Show me the places you talk about, not the places on my spreadsheets." She hesitated. Allowing a billionaire CEO to walk the streets of her community felt like a risk, but curiosity and trust nudged her forward. One crisp Saturday morning, Alexander arrived in an unmarked car, dressed casually, with no entourage. Destiny guided him through the neighborhoods he rarely visited, Bronzeville, Pilsen, Englewood. She introduced him to shop owners, community leaders, and families fighting to preserve their homes. The tour was transformative. Alexander listened more than he spoke. He noticed details he had overlooked in quarterly reports. The pride in a barber who kept his shop running for 30 years, the determination of a grandmother leading a block club, the fatigue of tenants facing rising rents. Through Destiny's introductions, he experienced Chicago not as a collection of properties, but as a city of lives interwoven by struggle and hope. As daylight faded, they paused at a cafe near her childhood block. For the first time, their conversation slipped fully beyond business. He shared the loneliness of boardrooms, the hollowness of accolades when no one close remained to share them. She shared the weight of constantly proving herself, the silent battles fought in a workplace that dismissed her before she even spoke. Their eyes met across the small table, and though neither voiced it aloud, they both felt the shift. Respect had become admiration. Admiration was becoming something deeper. Back at Tribune Broadcasting, however, Montgomery grew increasingly hostile. Each new assignment that placed Destiny in the spotlight fueled her resentment. Colleagues whispered about the CEO's preference, some hinting at favoritism, others quietly rooting for Destiny's breakthrough. Montgomery began scrutinizing her work more harshly, questioning her tone in interviews, delaying approval for her pieces, and attempting to reassign stories meant for her. What she couldn't control was Alexander's insistence. His requests carried weight the station couldn't ignore. For Destiny, the duality was exhausting. On one side, she found inspiration and validation through her work with Alexander, discovering that her voice truly mattered. On the other, she faced escalating pressure and thinly veiled hostility at the office. The contrast made every success bittersweet. As autumn settled over Chicago, Destiny's life was at a crossroads. She had lost the job she once thought was her dream, but she had gained clarity, support, and a love strong enough to fuel a new beginning. The battle with Montgomery was over, but a larger fight was just beginning. The fight to create something of her own, free from the chains of discrimination. And for the first time, Destiny felt not only ready, but unstoppable. The decision was made in silence, with no dramatic announcements and no pleas for reconsideration. Destiny gathered her things from Tribune Broadcasting in one evening, her belongings fitting into 2 cardboard boxes that told little of the years she had poured into her work. She left her press badge on the desk, slid her office key under the door, and stepped out into the night. For the first time in years, she felt lighter. Still, freedom came with fear. Bills would not stop arriving, and reputation alone could not fund her next step. Yet beneath the uncertainty was a fire that Tribune's years of rejection had failed to extinguish. She knew her worth. More importantly, she knew the stories worth telling. With Alexander's encouragement and her own relentless determination, she founded Chicago Voices, an independent media company focused on underrepresented communities. She rented a modest office in Pilsen, a neighborhood alive with murals and working-class resilience. The walls were bare, the furniture secondhand, and her equipment outdated. But for Destiny, it was more than enough. Her first hires were 2 young journalists who had also felt overlooked in larger newsrooms. Together, they began covering stories no one else prioritized. Immigrant families fighting displacement, grassroots organizations demanding police accountability, high school students creating innovative community programs. Destiny's instincts and connections quickly paid off. Viewers responded with gratitude, recognizing themselves in stories finally told with dignity. Word spread fast. Within 6 months, Chicago Voices had gained a loyal audience online. Partnerships with local nonprofits and universities added legitimacy. Donations trickled in, small at first, then steadily growing. Destiny often worked late into the night, reviewing edits, planning assignments, and writing with a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer about survival. It was about building a platform that could change the landscape of journalism in her city. Alexander supported her every step, not by overshadowing her efforts with his wealth, but by believing in her vision. He introduced her to people who could help, offered resources when needed, and most importantly, gave her the space to prove that she could do this on her own terms. Their relationship deepened in those months, rooted in mutual respect and admiration as much as affection. One autumn evening, Alexander invited Destiny to dinner in Little Italy. The restaurant was familiar, warm lighting, red-checkered tablecloths, the same place where months earlier they had shared their first personal conversation beyond the professional veil. Destiny remembered it well. The laughter, the shared stories, the recognition of something genuine forming between them. That night, as they lingered over pasta and wine, Alexander grew quiet. He looked at her not with the confidence of a man used to commanding boardrooms, but with the vulnerability of someone laying his heart bare. "Destiny," he began, his tone steady but filled with emotion. "These past months watching you build Chicago Voices have been extraordinary. You've created something powerful, something necessary. I've seen you fight through obstacles, stay true to your purpose, and lead with integrity. I fell in love with that strength, but also with the woman behind it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a ring that caught the light with quiet brilliance. "I don't want to just admire your courage from the sidelines. I want to walk beside you. Will you marry me?" The restaurant seemed to fade, the sounds of clinking glasses and soft conversation replaced by the pounding of Destiny's heart. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Yes," she whispered, then repeated more firmly, "Yes." The other diners noticed, applause breaking out as Alexander slid the ring onto her finger. It wasn't just a proposal, it was a promise. A promise that her fight, her sacrifices, and her dreams had led her not only to professional freedom, but also to a love that respected and celebrated her whole being. That night, as they left the restaurant hand in hand, Destiny felt the weight of the past finally lift. She was no longer the overlooked reporter at Tribune Broadcasting. She was the founder of a growing media movement, a woman whose work and love story were intertwined in ways she could never have scripted. The future stretched before her, filled with challenges and triumphs alike, but for the first time, she felt wholly prepared. She had a voice, a platform, and a partner who believed in her without condition. What began as a story of discrimination and disappointment had become one of empowerment, love, and new beginnings. The spring sun streamed through the stained glass windows of Chicago's cultural center, casting brilliant colors across the marble floors. Destiny and Alexander stood at the altar, flanked by friends, family, colleagues, and community leaders. The gathering brought together worlds that rarely intersected. Journalists who had watched Destiny struggle, residents from Chicago neighborhoods she had long covered, and business leaders who respected Alexander's vision. Yet in that room, the differences dissolved into shared celebration. Destiny's vows spoke not only of love, but of shared purpose. "You've shown me that true partnership means growth, challenge, and support," she said, her voice steady. "You see me for all that I am and inspire me to be better in every way." Alexander, in turn, acknowledged the lessons he had learned from her courage, integrity, and unwavering commitment to justice. Their words resonated beyond romance. They were a promise to uplift each other while influencing the communities around them. The wedding also marked a turning point for Tribune Broadcasting. Montgomery's pattern of discrimination, once buried in whispers and overlooked complaints, came to light. Inspired by Destiny's courage, 3 other reporters of color filed formal complaints citing systemic bias. The network faced internal investigations and public scrutiny, signaling that long-standing practices of inequity could no longer remain unchallenged. Destiny's experience had catalyzed change, and the message was clear. Silence and tolerance of unfair treatment were no longer acceptable. Meanwhile, Chicago Voices continued to grow, emerging as a model for independent journalism. Destiny's platform amplified stories that mainstream media often ignored, covering local activism, neighborhood redevelopment, and social initiatives with depth and authenticity. Subscribers expanded beyond Chicago, reaching national audiences eager for nuanced coverage and accountable reporting. The work proved that independent media, grounded in integrity and community engagement, could thrive and influence public discourse. Through the process, Destiny and Alexander discovered lessons that extended beyond their personal success. She learned to never let others define her worth. Repeated dismissal and humiliation could not erase her vision or conviction. Authentic connections, both professional and personal, arose naturally when she remained true to her values. When doors closed at Tribune Broadcasting, she created her own entrance, demonstrating that perseverance combined with courage could rewrite the rules of opportunity. Their relationship also illustrated the power of true partnership. Both had been transformed by the other. Destiny's perspective expanded Alexander's understanding of community responsibility, and his support enabled her to pursue bold ambitions without compromise. Love became not a distraction from ambition, but a catalyst for greater impact, proving that personal and professional fulfillment could coexist and even reinforce each other. The final moments of the wedding reception reflected this union of worlds and values. Community leaders spoke of Destiny's journalistic integrity, colleagues praised her advocacy, and friends toasted to the couple's shared commitment to uplift others. It was a celebration of achievement, resilience, and the enduring importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. As the evening wound down, Destiny addressed the gathered crowd with quiet authority. Our story shows that obstacles are not the end of the journey. They can shape purpose, clarify vision, and even open doors we never expected. Keep challenging yourself, stay true to your values, and never let anyone dictate your worth. To viewers following her journey, the message was clear: action and integrity matter. Subscribe to continue witnessing stories of perseverance and triumph, and tell us where you're watching from. The more voices join in, the more powerful these stories become, inspiring change in communities far beyond Chicago. Love, ambition, and resilience had converged in a story that transcended romance. Destiny and Alexander's journey reminded everyone that true fulfillment comes when we honor our values, seize opportunity courageously, and nurture connections that elevate both personal and collective purpose. Their story was a call to action for every viewer. Pursue your dreams, maintain integrity, and recognize the humanity and potential in every person you encounter.